Here's Mike Winger defending penal substitutionary atonement. First, what the heck is that?
This is from the book Pierce for Our Transgressions. I like this definition. They say the doctrine of penal substitution states that God gave himself in the person of his Son to suffer, instead of us, the death, punishment, and curse due to fallen humanity as the penalty for sin. So we had a penalty upon us, and he suffered that penalty in our place.
And now for an obvious objection.
First issue is penal substitution unjust because, and here's how the people will present their case, because they would say if God is perfectly just, he cannot punish an innocent person. I think this is actually a strong objection to penal substitution.
A good objection if I do say so myself. But let's not forget that Mike preempts this with a belief protection mechanism.
It's frequent on even the scholarly level that this doctrine is just wiped away. Like that's all they'll say about it is, oh, this is a ridiculous doctrine. Well, that's nothing new to us who read the New Testament and realize that the cross is, of course, foolishness to the world.
You can tell that he doesn't like that a lot of Christian scholars dismiss one of his deeply held religious beliefs. So he plays the "it's supposed to sound foolish" card, a game that literally any religious system can play to try to beat back the doubts of their adherents. But hey, sometimes things sound foolish because, well, they're foolish. But let's continue. How does Mike defend the morality of punishing the innocent? There's a couple responses that he gives that could be potential rebuttals, but he doesn't really commit himself to any of them, so I'm not going to address them at length here. But here's his main point.
But here's my answer. Here's my where I'm going to rest my case. Why could God punish, or Jesus experience punishment, be punished even, while he was yet innocent? And it has to do with a biblical doctrine called imputation. Imputation. And hopefully, I think if you're objecting to PSA, this answers your objection. Here's why it's just in a moral sense that Christ would suffer for our sins and be punished. Because if my sin that I've done is imputed to Christ, or another way to put it is it's like reduplicated in Jesus, like I'm still guilty. It's not like I'm not guilty anymore, but he is also found guilty for what I have done. If this is a reality, then I am seeing him actually be punished justly on one hand, because those are real sins that he's really being found guilty for, or punished for, I should say, because you don't necessarily have to have him found guilty, but he's being punished for them. On the other hand, it's pure. His life is pure. He didn't do anything to deserve it. He hasn't done anything to bring down this judgment upon himself. It's all because of me and you and our sin. And that looks like the cross. Like that looks like the biblical description.
In a way, I think this is sort of a non-answer. Usually when people ask, how is it just for God to punish an innocent person, they already have something like this theological picture in mind, along with the associated doctrines. It's as if Mike were to share his version of the gospel with someone, and when they push back with a fairness objection, he just repeats the same story again. But let's be charitable here and assume that something he said here would enlighten the person that's objecting. What next? Well, obviously they're just going to object to the moral coherence of imputation. Let's put some of these considerations into an argument to highlight what I'm talking about. The objector might say something like, premise 1, if PSA is true, there's nothing fundamentally wrong with punishing an innocent person. There is something fundamentally wrong with punishing an innocent person, therefore PSA is not true. What Mike would need to do here is try and talk the objector out of their moral intuitions in favor of premise 2. And to the degree that one has moral intuitions in favor of premise 2, then any talk of imputation is going to essentially just bounce right off. But let's be charitable here and assume that Mike is successful. What follows from that? Not as much as he might hope, unfortunately. Let me illustrate this with the death penalty as an example. Suppose someone thinks that the death penalty is moral. Does that position entail that they have to think that every instance of the death penalty is moral? Of course not. In the same way, there might be people who accept something like imputation in a very limited sense as it relates to liability in legal cases, without thereby committing themselves to the idea that justice could ever be served if someone was literally tortured to death for the sake of other people. So again, it seems that we're at an impasse. And it's not just a Christian versus non-Christian impasse either. As Christian theologian James McGrath writes, quote, despite the popularity of this image, to depict God as a judge who lets a criminal go free because he has punished someone else in their place is to depict God as unjust. Makes sense to me. And I really don't think Mike has done enough to establish that PSA is only apparently foolish and not just actually foolish.